All right, everybody. I think we are live.
Awesome.
Everyone can hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
Yep.
Perfect.
All good here.
Audio's good on my end.
Perfect.
Yep. Sounds good. Nice to have you here again, Cody.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's always nice to have you. Last weekend or week was a good time. Fun chatting about this and that, about the Aussie Arc Bone Reapers and stuff.
And Greg's immense collection of Dark Angels Praetors.
No, I mean they're not here yet.
Yeah.
Like they
But
were
they're
sold
purchased.
out.
But they're purchased.
out.
All them Praetors.
Timberley's here.
And Wartsylvania. Hey, everybody.
Awesome.
Sylvania's back.
Hello. Nice to see you guys.
Yeah, no, nice to have you in the chat here. We'll shortly start the actual portion of the podcast, which will primarily just be about Gelida and talking with Cody about just the process of creating it and all that sort of stuff. But if there are anything you'd like us to talk about, you could put it in the chat here, and that could be good.
And I would especially appreciate if anybody has questions about Gelida, and that would be a great time. I haven't had a forum or an opportunity to really talk to the community about it, so really appreciate everybody here between the Bolter and me for giving me that chance.
Yeah, no, I'm excited. It's like I feel anyone sort of in the Ink 28 sort of sphere has seen a lot of images and stuff through Instagram and things like that. So it's like been building up like sort of momentum constantly for the last couple months. So it's been really neat. And yeah, it'll be good to hear more kind of about that process. And we've certainly heard a little of it just from, conversing with you for the last month or two, but it'll be nice to hear about it in maybe a slightly more structured way.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Maybe before we get into that, do we want to talk a little bit about some of the stuff, like hobby-related stuff we're working on? Anyone?
Yeah, I mean, kind of to sound, not too much to sound like a broken record, but I think the Ogre is pretty much finally done that I've been working on. Like, I finally spent the time to sculpt his base. And I used Milliput for that, and I think it went pretty well. So I'll hopefully find the time to paint him in a little while. But yeah, so I'm finally done with that, and I have some plans for other potential conversions. I sort of feel like I might want to try and convert an Arctoflagellant. But
just in time for the
yeah, just in time for
the official release.
Yeah, of the few models they made.
Yeah.
This one will probably be made from one of the plastic Wood Elf Blood Bowl team members. I think they're particularly nice will work particularly well for certain conversions of that nature. But yeah, so that's what I've been working on. I'm happy that the Ogre is finally done. What was supposed to be a really quick conversion didn't quite pan out that way, but regardless, I'm happy with where it went.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Eric, have you done?
I've been continuing to paint these bone trees from like Wilhelm Miniatures. I'm pretty far along on two of them, but I haven't quite had as much time as I would like. And I guess the only other thing that's maybe of note, actually this evening we posted, have a new post on the blog between the Bolter and me about painting Anna's Kickstarter miniatures, or at least two of them, with a few more pictures of the models, as well as just a little bit of discussion about sort of how I went about painting them. So if people are interested, they can go and look at that.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Ward Sylvania says that he thinks the ogre is like exceptional and is really impressed with your green stuff skills.
Oh, thanks, Pennsylvania. Yeah, I think he turned out well. I just have to force myself to actually paint the model. And then because I feel once he's painted, everything will look even more seamless than it is currently. I tried my best to make it as seamless as possible, but I think he'll look good along with the other sisters that I have painted. And then we'll have to try and actually play more games of Mordheim. Oh, hey, Vox. Nice to have you here tonight.
Everyone's here.
It's true.
Cody, have you had any chance to work on any models as of late?
Actually, yes. Not that I should. I've got so many things. I mean, everybody's got so many things going on in their life, but
Yeah,
I just you know how it is. You get a bug in your ass, and then you just have to do it. Yeah. So there's a couple things that I've actually worked on since we last spoke. One of them is a Primaris conversion into a Horus Heresy model. It's for a project that I don't think the group is ready to announce yet. It's not a setting, but a group of hobbyists are all going to embark upon a Horus Heresy related venture that has to do with making true scale models. And cool. As you all can see from the last podcast, scale and anatomy are not my strong suit. So I just simply grabbed the Primaris model from Adepticon and just started chopping into it, because I figured Primaris are probably pretty close to realistic, other than their ridiculously gigantic guns.
Yeah,
but
I mean,
they're good.
They're pretty good.
I don't remember the Adepticon Primaris miniature.
Is it like a lieutenant holding his helmet or something at his side?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, he's holding his helmet to his side, and he has a sword as well. It's one of the better looking lieutenants, although, it's kind of a weird comment considering that there's probably more lieutenants than there are Primaris units.
Yeah, a lot.
But they come out with a new one like every month.
Yeah, and he doesn't have the tremendous squatting pose that most Space Marines have.
No, actually, I thought his pose was very similar to Roberta Gilliman from the Primarch series. Just kind of standing, with, a general. I wouldn't, his legs aren't perfectly straight. They're still out a little bit, but it's not a squat.
He's standing up straight. Good.
He's standing up straight.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for who. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the chat on a phone, so it's difficult to see. Was that Vox? Yeah, Vox. Thanks for saying how nice the model looks. But the other things that I've been working on are hobby related, but are just simply sketches. I haven't done too much drawing in the past, but I have been stewing up a project for a very, 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 very long time, and I just didn't think that I could conceptualize it well by just chopping miniatures apart.
Mm-hmm.
So I started drawing it. As I told you last stream, Isaac Tobin's feature in White Dwarf is what got me back into the hobby, because I had quit for a while and I didn't know anything about Inquisitor or this style of gaming. And since then, I've always wanted to start my own Navigator house, but have never even attempted it because I knew without more experience, I would almost certainly just rob every idea of him. I would just model things that looked like Isaac's models, but worse. And that was unacceptable to me, obviously. And now that I've had the chance to actually meet Isaac and talk with him a little bit, and kind of just bounce some ideas back and forth with other people like you guys and other people in the community, I think that I finally have kind of landed on a motif. So my navigators are going to feature a lot of Gothic archway motifs.
Okay, yeah.
They'll be adorned with hats that have, the classic 40K arches that you see in their buildings and things like that. But they're also going to be a very particular type of house.
Mm-hmm.
There's 3 different types of Navis Nobilite, but one of them are called renegades, and typically they just fall out of grace and can no longer hold any power, so they just venture off of Terra and out into the stars, almost in shame a lot of the time, to do their own thing. But my house is not a renegade by failure. They're a renegade by appointment. Mm-hmm. Essentially, the most powerful navigator, who there is a particular name for, but I can't remember, has actually appointed this particular navigator house to dispose of other troublesome navigators. Something that's very well known in the 40K lore is that navigators deal with their own.
Yeah.
They kind of live outside of the rule of the Imperium because they're actually more powerful than the Imperium in many ways. So when someone threatens that power that they hold by besmirching the navigators or by exposing some of the more rampant mutations among navigators, they have to be dealt with. And so my group is going to take on a sort of assassination sort of role amongst the navigator households, and have a lot of necromantic and mortuary sort of themes among them. And they're also going to have servo gargoyles.
That sounds cool. If you want, when you start working on that stuff, I can help you design some like cool weapons and stuff for them.
That would be great. I would love the help. I'm sure that this is biting off more than I can chew with this idea, but
I feel the more ambitious you try to do stuff, the better. It just pushes you, on further.
Awesome.
I certainly hope so.
And the whole idea of doing more with the navigator households and stuff in general, I think, is neat, because up until this point, Games Workshop themselves have done almost nothing with them. So it's really wide open, and I feel you could come up with just about anything and like fit it pretty nicely and neatly within like the current lore. So like I think it's a great place to look into.
Well, thanks. I certainly hope so. And I obviously would appreciate any sort of help, because you guys are the best around.
Nah, it would be great. I'd love to help.
So Greg, how are your Dark Angels going?
I haven't done anything with them.
Okay.
But once I get an email from Forge World saying the Praetor models are back in stock, you better believe me, I'll be hitting that buy button so fast.
So exciting.
Admittedly, I did. A friend where I work wanted to get that Rise of the Fiend, or whatever the new Eldar, Dark Eldar boxed game thing is.
Oh, yeah.
He wanted to get that, so I gave him some money to finance that. So maybe in the future I'll play some of the scenarios in that book.
Playing 40K, Greg. I never thought I'd hear you do that again.
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, it hasn't happened yet. But he had pre-ordered it from Games Workshop, so of course what that means is he doesn't have it once it's released.
Well, yeah, they're really bad about
he
shipping
still
stuff
doesn't
out
have
now. Years ago, they used to be really good. Like, if you'd pre-order something, you would actually get it on the release day. Now all it means is on the release day, they might ship it out, but probably not. They'll just box it up.
As of
they're bad at it now.
Wow.
Out here, I have a lot of friends who end up getting their models early.
Really?
Which I think is odd.
Okay. I mean, that's
they pre-order them, and then sometimes they'll get them in the mail a day or two ahead of time.
That's good, because that's what I remember it used to be like, but like, for a long time now, it has not. yeah, so I guess it just depends on where you are, and like the headquarters of GW in like the United States is now very different than it had been as well. So
That's
It
true.
certainly is.
I wonder if it has anything to do with the order in which people are pre-ordering it. I don't know how many they get in volume.
yeah, so I mean that's
And not that
possible
that's an excuse. I wouldn't excuse it. I think that if you put in a pre-order, then you should get it the day it releases. But
Or at least shortly after.
yeah, if
Yeah, I mean,
some
particularly if you
people are
put it
getting it
in
somewhat
pretty
early and then
early.
everyone else is getting it, kind of later in the process, maybe they're just prioritizing based upon the time at which you pre-ordered, which would be kind of silly. You should just send it all out at once.
Yeah, well, it is what it is.
Indeed.
Do you think we want to maybe just get into the episode itself?
Yeah.
I'm all for it.
Since we're recording it a little differently, I don't think we have to do the normal like 3, 2, 1 thing. So I'm just gonna start with the introduction thing, such that it'll be easier for me to kind of edit out the audio. Does that sound all right for everybody?
Yeah, I think so.
Of course.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dragged into Turbolasers, a Between the Bolter and Me podcast. This is episode 63, and I'm your host, Eric Wire. And as always, I'm here with my two brothers, Adam Wire.
Hey, everybody.
And Greg Wire.
Hey, everyone.
And I'm extremely excited to be able to say that we have a special guest for this particular episode, Cody Taylor, who you may be more familiar with from his Instagram handle, Majos Bjor, and he's actually kind of been the mastermind for the Gelida project. But yeah, happy to have you here, Cody.
It is an absolute honor.
Yeah, it was exciting. We actually had you on just our normal streams last week to talk, but we thought it would be exciting to have you on here to just sort of do some back and forth, like questioning and talking about your Gelida project and some of the games that it spawned, and just, be able to talk with you kind of about the whole process. So yeah, it's good to have you here.
Well, thanks. I'm excited for it. Like I've told you before, I've not yet had a forum to be able to vocalize everything that's been going on with Gelida, not just in the gaming sense, but what's been going on and developed in the lore and in the world. So I'm really excited for the opportunity to just kind of sit with some friends and chat about it.
Yeah, that sounds great. Like I have a few kind of questions lined up, but I feel it probably will shift around a little bit organically. But maybe just as like sort of a baseline, could you talk just briefly about a little bit about yourself, like, and like how you got involved in the hobby, and then maybe with some focus on how you actually shifted and started to be interested in the even more niche part of the Games Workshop hobby, that is like Inquisitor 28 and that sort of narrative sort of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first encountered Warhammer at a somewhat young age, when I stumbled into a shop looking to learn about Dungeons and Dragons and other games like that I had only heard of but had never played, and fell in love the moment that I saw the miniatures on the shelves. There was just something about bringing those type of worlds to life with art that kind of gripped me. The very first thing that I had related to Warhammer was the Warhammer Fantasy 5th Edition starter box. And
which one was that?
It was Orcs and Empire.
Okay.
Everybody remembers the very goofy orc archers that were all the exact same model.
Yeah.
Kind of lined up in a row. And then in addition to that box, I remember getting an Empire general with a horse, like on a steed.
Oh,
and the first ever orc wyvern, because that was the big bad orc boss at the time. It's orc war boss on wyvern, which admittedly is probably not a very good matchup. You know, if you're using two generals, a guy and a horse and a guy with a giant man-eating dragon, not a great pair. But I didn't know the rules very well. I remember playing a game on the carpet with my younger brother, and I distinctly remember cheating him because I was young and stupid, and neither of us really had a good grip on it anyways. But I painted very poorly, and I didn't have any friends, especially friends or even acquaintances who liked Dungeons and Dragons or Warhammer or any sort of narrative fantasy or sci-fi stuff. So I put it down for years because I just didn't have anyone to enjoy it with. And then, as I said before, it wasn't until I was much older that I stumbled into a shop with a friend and saw a white dwarf on the shelf, and it happened to be the white dwarf with the Blanchitsu section featuring Isaac Tobin's Navigators.
Oh boy.
And I was floored.
Yeah, man.
I think, as are most people who get into Ink 28, noticed a common thread or theme among most of us is that we see Isaac's miniatures and then we go, damn it, I have to do this. You know, this is just too cool. So then I delved and tried to figure out what in the world it was to begin with, because it certainly wasn't an army. It was Warhammer, but not the Warhammer I knew.
Yeah.
And it was, and even though I had gotten back into the game and I, built and played with some armies and things like that, it wasn't what I wanted. I knew I always wanted, that version of Warhammer, but I didn't know what in the world it was. And I only stumbled upon the Inquisitorium by accident because I was using an Inquisitor model for an Iron Warrior's Demon Prince.
Okay.
So I was Googling Inquisitor.
Yeah.
And I was looking on Facebook for Inquisitor models and stumbled into the Inquisitorium, and it was as if, the gates of heaven, or I guess the gates of Holy Terra, had opened and basked me in its light. I just couldn't believe that this, what is it now, 6,000 strong community?
Yeah, it's a lot.
It's up there. Was just sitting just out of view.
Yeah, no.
This is a Facebook group.
Such a good resource with so many different ideas and different people kind of doing their own thing, their own take on the universe.
Yeah. After finding the Inquisitorium, though, I would say I was a part of it for maybe 2 years before I actually posted anything. I was intimidated by you all and your amazing miniatures and your amazing conversions and your incredible artwork and your incredible paint jobs. And I just didn't think that it would be possible for me to make anything of it. But when the Iron Sleet Invitational for the Thorn Moons rolled around, I finally got the guts to participate, and I made a small group of Nightsiders, which I happen to know that you are very familiar with.
They're great. I love them.
I'm glad. And that was my first foray into all of this. It was the first time I painted a miniature for Ink 28. It was my first attempt to be a part of the community.
Well, so the funny thing was, we had been in the hobby for a long time, and we actually here there's the invitational models you're talking about. I brought them up on screen.
Thank you.
I remember it was around the time when Games Workshop kind of just stopped everything in like Games Day and stuff in the United States, they stopped that. Right before that, I had been painting, but then I probably stopped for like maybe like 5 years. And it was
Uh-huh.
only because of Iron Sleet's first invitational that I actually started painting models again.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
like,
it was a while.
yeah, so
Yeah.
and I mean, I was still sort of converting stuff on the blog and everything, but I hadn't painted anything in like 5 or 6 years. And that's what got me to actually find like, all right, there's a deadline. I have to make 3 models. I'm gonna convert them as best I can and actually paint them. So that's kind of a fun coincidence. So like, I feel
What a
stuff
parallel.
like that. Yeah.
A deadline does wonders, and just like a sort of a brief or a prompt or something that you
Mhm.
can kind of work with, and then kind of get excited by what other people are doing.
I think that's why Inktober is so successful with artists.
No,
I mean,
that's very true.
I walked into Michael's the other day to pick up some supplies for sketching. Like I had told you guys before, there was some concepts for miniatures I didn't think would be appropriate to just build without
Yeah.
figuring it out first. And when I brought the materials to the woman behind the counter, she said, "Oh, Inktober?"
No, that's great.
That's great.
It's like,
Yeah.
damn right.
Yeah. I was obviously not there for that, but I said, yeah, of course, yeah, October, yeah. I mean, well into it, just destroyed all my other paper, with all those sketches and the pens and the stuff,
Yeah. Well, I mean, so that's good. I mean, this might be a kind of a good point to transition. Like, you then created this sort of collaborative project movement called Gelida. Could you just briefly summarize like what it is, this like the setting and some of the things that inspired it? Like a little later, we can talk more in depth about the setting, but just to kind of give people an idea about it.
Yeah, of course. I'll give you just a brief summary of it, and I think I'll reserve the inspirations for the setting for later. Gelida itself is a very small world that is located on the very, very fringes of the Sol system, of not even quite in Imperium-controlled space. It's a very, very forgotten world. The Imperium has not visited it in so long that none of the citizens themselves have ever seen the Imperium. No one on the planet that is alive has ever seen any sight of them. But the world itself is covered in ice, and covered in snow, and covered in blizzards, and is barely survivable. It's a horrid place to be, and humanity has largely been pushed to the equator, because it's one of the few places where, at least during the daytime, one can be outside with with most confidence that they won't freeze to death.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's mostly what the world is like.
So Death World among the best of them.
I hope so.
Yeah.
One of the primary things, I guess, that people pull from the setting that, at least aesthetically, is very important to it is that due to these harsh conditions, there are some, I wouldn't say elite few, but there are those who must venture out into this frigid wasteland for resources, and they do that mostly in customized vehicles. So the world itself features many, many walkers and retrofitted tanks and many different pilots, with a strong focus on them and people in environmental suits. and things they can use to survive, at least survive long enough that they can bring something back to humanity that might keep the candle burning just a little bit longer.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good sort of summary of the world as a whole. And I guess like the three of us, I think, know maybe a little bit more about some of the background just from talking with you a little bit, like over the last couple months and such. But I feel a lot of people who are kind of familiar with Gelidas are probably primarily familiar with it due to Instagram and kind of like a hashtag Gelida and some of those things, and have got a sense of the setting just because like from the photos and stuff, you see a lot of like big mechs and stuff and snowy wastelands and such. But for most people, yeah, just seeing those people, like those pictures and such, they probably don't know too much about some of like the effort and stuff you and the kind of some of the people involved in the project have put into kind of creating the world itself and all that background and such. Could you talk a little bit about some of the elements and such you went about creating to sort of strengthen the narrative there, and just a little bit about why that was important to you?
Yeah, of course. Something that I know that you guys are familiar with, but maybe not everybody in the chat is familiar with, is that these events that you see put together, brilliant events, are not often narratively structured. They are narratively driven, but they are very anarchic, if that makes sense. You know, it's an anarchy of narrative. When everyone shows up, the goal is to have miniatures that all look as if they belong in the same world. But generally speaking, the events of the past, everyone's just plopped the miniatures on a table and made up the story from there. And
there might be some general guidelines or some scenario things like this is the general goal, but a lot of it can be somewhat chaotic with so many people involved and different kind of inspirations and storylines for individual models. It can be a little hectic and hard to have a greater driving narrative there.
It can be, but I think most of the time it's actually the appropriate move, especially for a one-off event.
Yeah,
because a lot of these settings that have been put together, one of the threads that I noticed is that though they were celebrated by the entire community as a whole, in all reality, it was almost as if it was just a one-shot Necromunda game with a really tight group of friends.
Yeah, no.
I mean, Tor Megiddo and Midgard and so many brilliant settings took place with 6 or 7 friends, and no one else was involved. You know, the setting was created, the miniatures were created, the event happened, and then afterwards, you know, in the aftermath of the event, or just simply by viewing the miniatures and their creation leading up to the event, the community celebrated it. But it wasn't primarily created as an open forum, if that makes sense. Unlike something like an invitational. So when I first came up with the idea behind Gelida, I was just simply living on the Cloud 9 dream fumes of the Mayor Salam event. It was the first time that I had ever participated in anything Inc. 28, and I still was unsure why I was even invited in the first place. You know, I still had...
this was, if people aren't familiar, it was one of Dark Tech's events.
It was his event, but he actually was not the creator. That's interesting point to make, that that if you go to the Mer Salam group, and you'll find there's still many things from Mer Salam on that group, that there is an entirely different creator of the setting altogether. It's just that one, Dark Tech has one of the largest followings in our community.
Yeah.
And two, he is a monster when it comes to turnout. That guy can just put a miniature together for inspiration's sake, and then over the course of a week build 12 miniatures fully painted and fully converted to go with that miniature.
Yeah, no, it is true.
And he built so many things for Mar Salam. So in a way, whether he was the creator of Mar Salam or not, the fact that he hosted the event and he had an ungodly amount of miniatures and terrain made and ready for it, you could say that he, at least as far as that event was concerned, he absolutely owned it. But that event took place much like most events do. It was just a small group of us, just five friends, although I admittedly was completely new to the group, had not met anyone yet before in person. And it was very just chaotic. We were talking in between games about the narrative reasons things might have happened.
Yeah.
And we had a structure of what scenarios should take place. There was 3 games and we knew what the overall games were going to be like, but more in a 40K sort of sense, in that the first game was gang versus gang. The next one was mostly vehicles racing up to something. And the last one was a sky whale hunt. But we kind of had to juxtapose our reasons why all of this was happening in between the games themselves, and all the interactions between our gangs forged the story. And it was beautiful, and it was incredible, and it was amazing. It was, at that point in time, it was the best Warhammer experience I'd ever had. And coming off of that experience, I was furiously texting Dark Tech of all of these crazy hay fever dreamed ideas that I had for different settings, because it's something that that's always stuck with me, especially being a person who has DM'd a lot of RPGs. That aspect of this hobby, of the Inc. 28 hobby, interested in me the most. Creating a new Warhammer world, creating a new setting with its own aesthetic and its own things. And eventually he kind of gave me the endorsement, so to speak, that I needed when we had kind of talked back and forth, and I had come up with this idea for Gelida, although it had not been named yet. The idea back then simply being that, what if there was an ice world, being that snow and ice worlds had not really been covered yet in Inc. 28, that was so harsh, that was so brutal, so cold, that our war bands would have to be in vehicles. That was the initial idea, and he loved the idea, and so that was all of the encouragement that I needed, so to speak, to take off from there. When it came to the setting itself, as you all know from speaking to me and getting to know me over the last month or two, Gelida is more narratively developed and narratively driven than most past events, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. But the reason, more than anything, that I had leaned towards that outcome for the setting itself had to do a lot with the scope of participation that I hoped to have. Because the one thing that I had noticed in my experience in the Inc. 28 community is that, whether it was warranted or not, I was intimidated I was intimidated by every setting and every miniature and everything that everyone was doing. It was just so intimidating to me, and I had no idea how a person would get involved. And even after I had been involved, even after I had made miniatures for the Invitational and after I had participated in Mer Salam, I still wasn't sure how I got involved. I don't know how it happened. I really don't.
Mhm.
I tried to trace back the steps to, you know, how did I get here? How could I, you know, share that knowledge? How could I tell someone else, oh, you're interested in Ink 28? Let me tell you, man, this is how you do it.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer. So I was hoping that Gelida might be an avenue, maybe for someone who's not quite sure how they would get involved in Ink 28, or maybe they're slightly intimidated by some of the greater works in the community and they don't think that they would produce something good enough. Because I know I felt that way at one point.
Yeah, no, I feel it. Yeah, it's sort of an interesting thing, like, because a lot of this stuff started out with just small kind of groups of friends getting together to try to plan events, and they just, for kind of just to help the community as a whole, decided they were gonna like tell people about it and show pictures and such. So they like were never necessarily intended to be something for everyone per se.
Right.
But it's, as more and more people have been doing them and such, like there's just been generating more and more interest about it, if people want to try to do a similar thing. So I feel there's more than ever, there's been this sort of impetus, like, how do I get involved? And so I think your idea here of like, how can I help assist people to get involved in this is a good thing. And actually, Ward Sylvanus actually in the chat here, like he kind of did
James.
a similar thing, or had a sort of a similar kind of conclusion that like he would like to try to get more people involved. And like for his Carrion Pass event at like the previous Adepticon, he like created it and tried to like put it out there, like if people want to get involved, like that you could, and have it, the event set over 2 days to get people involved. And even for the Mare Solarum thing, I think Dark Tech kind of put it out there, like if people are interested in being involved, like you could, like it's limited number of space for like the actual event, because you know it's like at someone's house or apartment or something.
It was in his apartment.
Yeah, so like,
and his apartment is very small.
Yeah,
I will
so
say,
like
with 5 of us in there, we were wondering how we were going to fit.
So yeah, like, so it's kind of a challenging thing that like these things are sort of small things. It's not like a major competitive tournament where it's designed like 100 tables or something. So it's sort of a challenging thing. Like, how do you help people kind of get involved and be excited about trying to do their own things as well as like still, you know, doing what you want to do and like interacting with like the friends that you've built up over time. But yeah, so it's nice to hear that that's something like you've kind of been considering. But I guess with that in mind, like you're saying that you wanted to create something that would allow this, like how did you actually physically go about doing that and getting people like involved and interested in it?
So initially, well, I shouldn't say initially, it still is. Gelida has a private Facebook group that it, you know, like most of these events, that's the way that they start. I had a sense initially that I couldn't simply open up the floodgates. I had to get the help from those that I knew would have the criticism that I was looking for, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like obviously, you know, even though the community is large and it's vast, you know, I know barely anyone in it. So I tried to pull from those that I knew and ask them if they'd be interested in being a part of the group, even if they didn't want to contribute. I was just hoping that they would be a part of it. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I was very fortunate to have some really great names in the Ink 28 community who were willing to be a part of the group, whether they made miniatures or not. And I had their feedback. I had their criticism in my ear when I was forging the world itself. And and I had to create that baseline before I could start just letting in anyone who wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So it is a private Facebook group now, but it used to be a secret group that only had, about a dozen people in it. And we were mostly, for a long time, just talking back and forth about what the world should be. And a lot of that actually took place in private messages. But what I will say, for anybody who's interested in creating a setting, the criticism may be hard to hear sometimes, but it's also something you may have to seek out sometimes. There was many times where I think that people didn't necessarily want to just outright say what was on their mind about Gelida, and I kind of had to track them down. For example, I won't name the artist, but a great artist who I'm a huge fan of, who I adore, he at one point said that he didn't, even though he was in the Gelida group, that he didn't think he would participate in it. And I didn't know that, but I had kind of noticed him just not really participating in the chats and things like that in the forum. So I went to the length of, I prepared myself. I was like, here we go. And asked him, like, hey, is there anything that could be better about Gelida? And there was a lot that could be better about Gelida. That's what I will say. And he is much more wise than me and could see so many different flaws with my early interpretations of the world and the early designs. Particularly, the big thing that stuck out to me that had stuck in my mind ever since then, and I think really saved Gelida as a setting, is that initially it did not necessarily feel like a 40K world. It almost just felt like a ported over sci-fi world that could be anywhere. Initially, it just sounded as if we're all going to make mechs in the snow, and I didn't realize that because I hadn't dug deep enough, and I needed a little help there.
Well, so what was done to make it such that it doesn't just feel like that?
Oh, so many things. I've talked to you guys a lot about those aspects over the last few months, but I found that a big part of making a world feel lived in is to make sure that the world itself has its own characteristics that act autonomously of the characters and the players. There has to be things that just go on whether or not you interact with it. And once I started developing those aspects in my mind, thinking, how can I make this feel like it's part of Warhammer? What things can I pull from Warhammer's actual lore and tweak a bit? What can I, what kind of things do you see on an Imperial world in 40K? What kind of things do you see on a nice world in 40K? What would you see on a death world in 40K? And when I pulled a lot of those elements together, but then thought to myself, okay, now what effect would Gelida have on that? Then I really felt like pieces started to fall into place. For example, one thing that you see, especially on low gravity planets that are really cold, is Ogryn. Ogryn are really common on cold worlds in 40K. But Gelida is not necessarily low gravity. There's definitely Ogryn on Gelida, but what I took from it is that there are some abhumans that do better in the cold.
Yeah.
Or even better, at least in my mind, on cold worlds, there are abhumans.
Yeah.
So one of the stronger themes of Gelida is that almost every abhuman you can imagine has has made place somewhere in the world, and it's caused, I wouldn't say tension between the normal humans and the abs humans, but there's a clear class division like you see in most 40K worlds, but on this world, the division is between the subterranean and the surface dwellers, because most people who live on Gelida never actually see the sun.
Yeah, they're trapped deep.
They live in
beneath
tunnels.
The snow and ice to kind of protect themselves.
Because it's all they can do.
Yeah.
And if any of those underground dare dig their way to the surface or find their way to the surface, the likelihood that they'll be tolerated is slim.
Yeah.
When sort of developing some of this stuff, like how much of this was developed like with the people in the group there, or was it like just initially you were kind of bouncing ideas around and then you started to kind of drill down what you wanted later, or was it like kind of a consistent like feedback and tweaking things?
Well, I'd like to say that it was completely collaborative, but I think in this case, if I was being wholly honest, I tried to make sure that the higher concepts were collaborative and were done back and forth. I tried to make sure that the upper crust of the narrative, so to speak, was something that we all worked on together initially. But after that, there was lore that did come from what people built. So, for example, I wasn't necessarily planning for squats to be a part of the world, but then someone built a really awesome convoy of squats, and then somebody else built more squats. And so I said, all right, well, space dwarves it is. They are part of Gelida now. But a lot of the detail beyond the higher concept, once dug a little bit deeper, I honestly have taken on most all of it. And I think I won't ever do that again. It's a massive undertaking, and it's something that I'm used to, I suppose. When I have not been playing Warhammer in the past, I filled that void with role-playing games. And those who had played with me knew that I was a beast of burden to an extent when it came to that. Not only would I design the setting, but I would design an entire system of rules, and I would design brand new character types and creature types and just everything about the world I kind of created from the ground up. And the people that I were playing with at the time were just like, fucking sweet, and they just show up and they have the characters that they kind of had developed a little bit. I'd probably help them develop the character. But I would take a lot on my shoulders, I guess. And with Gelida, I guess I had thought to myself that the more cohesive I could make this narrative, then the more cohesive the events will be. Yeah. Because unlike most Inc. 28 events, 2 Gelida events have happened already, and there is another one in November. I designed Gelida to be the type of world that there could be a lot of different events and a lot of different games. But these 3 particular events are a saga of sorts that are all linked narratively and have all been continually telling a story. And I guess I wanted everyone who was participating in the events to not only feel as if they were having an impact on the world itself, because the results of the first event influence the second, and the results of both those events have influenced the third that's coming up. But I wanted all of those players to feel connected. You know, I guess it's kind of selfish in a way because I can't make it to the event in England. I don't yet have a passport, and I definitely don't have the money to go to England.
Yeah,
but
it's an expensive thing.
It can be, but I wanted to. I guess I was just hoping, at least personally, that I could feel connected to those players in that event in a way, but that everybody involved could feel that same way.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's true. And I mean, to be honest, like, I feel it's good. You want to get people's input to help sort of shape something into something that, like, you think everyone can enjoy. But at some point, like, you have to kind of do a lot of the legwork yourself and, like, be passionate about it to keep pushing people along such that it sort of maintains momentum. But a lot of what you're saying, like is neat, and like how you wanted to, like, sort of develop it, almost like how people, like a GM would develop things for a role-playing game. But, like, how do those concepts actually make its way into, like, the games themselves? Like, because it all sounds like good and exciting, but, like, there's still could be sort of this disconnect from, like, because people are still just going to make stuff that they think looks cool, like the squat warband, like you were saying. Like, how do those ideas that you're talking about actually make their way into the games themselves? Is this due to the scenarios you've drawn? Is it, like, drawn up? Is it due to, like, flavor text and things you read, or, like, to convey a mood before, like, the scenarios are played, or, like, sort of semi-scripted events that occur throughout the games? Or, like, how do you get that to actually be conveyed? Because, like, even if you, like, let's say you develop a bunch of stuff about some of the noble houses on Gelida or something, like, how does that actually get conveyed into a game rather than just be, like, stuff in your mind that has made it richer and allowing you to write stuff better? But, like, how do you translate that?
A lot of different ways. I'm glad you brought this up, actually, because I don't think I've been able to articulate any of that. And I'm glad that you see the challenge in it.
Oh, it's
because
a big challenge, yeah.
Because I think it took a lot of work. What people may not know, right, is that even though Gelida has been ramping up over the last couple of months in a way, at least on Instagram and through photos and such, I've been working on this for more than a year. And it has not always had momentum. For a time, Gelida had the members, and and we were making miniatures, so to speak. Yeah. But it didn't have. But I was deep in. I was in the tank, if you know what I mean. Like thought-wise, I was trying to mangle in my mind how I could possibly make something like this work. And I think that I didn't know that it wasn't how it was supposed to work. I think I kind of went into this with the assumption that I was supposed to be some sort of GM, or that there was supposed to be something narratively going on to kind of tie this all together. Because Mar Salam was the only event that I had ever went to. And even though it was very freeform, and I loved it, I didn't know that was the way that it typically happened. You know, I just thought that everybody made miniatures and there wasn't really story materials prepared and everything worked out and it was great. And I just thought in my mind, like, well, I don't want my first event to be hinging on everyone showing up and just having good narrative gel. Yeah. If that makes sense. You know, I didn't want people to show up and then one guy shows up and says, like, hey, I know that you guys said that it wasn't involved, but I brought orcs, you know, and then just have like this whole thing where it's like, okay, well, how do we justify that? I don't know how my warband would interact. I don't know what is going on. So there is a couple different ways that I have attacked this issue. A couple different ways. One, my first event, the event that I hosted here in my state, I GM'd. I did not play my own. I played my own miniatures, but they acted in an NPC sort of fashion. They were part of the scenarios. Two, and this is the more cogent solution that's happening across all events. All events have had narrative cards that have been rewards that have gleaned more into what's going on in the world and current events, or gleaned more into what's going on in the world as a whole, that are essentially intel that's rewarded as you achieve objectives.
That's cool.
So it's in my first event, the event cards were sort of a path, if that made sense. There was like option A or option B, you know, and depending on what you did in that scenario, you would get different information, or sometimes not at all if you didn't achieve any sort of objectives. Because another thing is that the objectives were a secret in the first event for the scenarios. People didn't know exactly what they were supposed to do to get a card. But they did know what they needed to do to get more credits.
Okay.
So they would have to just happen upon information, but they knew what they needed to do to gain financial gain. There was a couple times where, well, I guess, no, just one. There was one game that we played in the first event where no one got any sort of secret objective card or anything.
Well, here's the question. Those secret objective cards, if you were to acquire one, they told you some like information or lore about the happenings and stuff, but did they offer other like tangible in-game benefits or?
Yes.
Like
yes, they
new
did.
objectives and stuff, or?
No, they didn't offer new objectives. They offered permanent bonuses to a character. So, in like, for example, in the first event, one of the cards detailed a strange symbol that was found on the body of a beastman. And this symbol is the same symbol that you would see if you went to Darktech's Instagram and you found the Renegade Knight that he made for Gelida. That's a symbol that he created himself, but I adopted as the symbol for the general chaos or uprising on Gelida. And it described it verbally on the card. So people kind of had to draw conclusions, which they didn't initially. The person who got that card was kind of like, huh. And then eventually they're like, oh, crap, is that Darktech's? And so they kind of made the connection that maybe these beastmen are more organized than they thought. But that card also gave permanent +1 weapon skill to the leader of that warband when they got the card itself. In the second event, there was you could either get permanent bonuses or you could get credits, which in the events, because of the rule set that we made, credits are somewhat valuable because you often need to repair your vehicles.
Well,
and so that was a somewhat valuable thing. I know that to some people, they might be thinking, like, for a Necromunda, like, one-day event, why would you want credits? That just seems like a lame reward. But it's needed for Gelida, because if you don't have the money to fix your vehicle, then you just don't get to take it to the next scenario until you have enough money to fix it.
What type of rule set were you using? Was it something largely like your creation, like piecing together like Necromunda rules and Inquisitor rules, Warhammer rules, etc.? Like, what exactly? Because like I feel a lot of the events kind of are a hybrid of a lot of different things, often focusing around on one variation of Necromunda.
Yeah, this was a rule set that I designed. My friend Dustin Vogel helped me edit it and help me refine some of the ideas to really put them into action better, but it's based on Inquisimundo. So the rules themselves include a VDR, a Necromunda style VDR for designing your own vehicles. For those who played old editions of Warhammer or Rogue Trader, for that matter, the vehicle design rule table was like a gift to hobbyists like us. You know, you could just design your own Imperial vehicle or your own Orc vehicle or whatever you wanted. You design it from the ground up, and I knew in my bones that that's what Gelida needed initially. The interesting thing about vehicles in Gelida, though, is that they adopt certain stats from their pilots. For example, weapon skill, ballistic skill, intelligence, leadership, cool, like those type of stats. I didn't think they weren't really appropriate for a vehicle to have itself. You know, your pilot would change whether or not you actually hit with your bullets, and would actually change whether or not you know you're swinging your axe properly with your walker. You know, so whoever is currently piloting a vehicle can change its efficiencies to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, so all this sounds like a pretty neat way to like kind of get some of the narrative involved in there. I mean, it seems like it's like a lot of work on like your part to like build in all these things and connections and stuff. Like how well did that like information actually translate over to the players and such? Or was there a lot of like cards or things that you created that ultimately like weren't discovered, or because they weren't discovered, like a portion of the narrative was never actually revealed because, and how much just general basic lore was like available to people who were going to play in it beforehand?
Okay, so there's a couple different questions there. I'll attack. No, you're good. You're good. So the first one that I'll address is how much basic lore did they have? They had a decent amount, or as much as they needed, because I primed everyone coming to each event. So for event number 1, everyone getting into the event had a lore primer to an extent.
And were they different for
what's
different
currently
people?
going on? Say what?
Were some of those, did they differ for like different like war bands and stuff? Or was it all pretty like general, at least initially?
Initially, it was very general, but there was a reason for that. Everyone who participated in event number 1 had convoys that were not aligned with the Renegade or the Uprising or the I wouldn't say, I guess, you know, a lot of people. So what's the best way to explain it? Gelida kind of currently based on these events, right? And what's going on in these events and the story that's being told. There is the Vanguard as a category, right? I just categorize it that way. That's the name I use for it. But they're essentially people who are trying to protect Gelida's way of life and continue the status quo despite any sort of flaws. They think that humanity's best chance is to uphold imperial law, even though they haven't seen the Imperium, in their entire lifetimes, and to try to stick to those codes. And then there's the revolt, right? And that's abhumans who are fed up, chaos worshippers who still think the gods care about them, even though the gods don't, and a lot of different things. But generally speaking, you have two camps: people who might be tempted by chaos, and people who definitely wouldn't be. And in the first event, everybody was there. They were loyal. So there was no need to disseminate different information, right? They all got the same spiel. But there was narrative developments as the event went on as it pertains to that particular point. But the basic primer they got for the first event was that each of them was hired by Noble House Domina, and I explained kind of what Noble House Domina was like, and that that Noble House Domina is named after who they believed was the first person to set foot on Gelida, who was a female rogue trader, supposedly by that name. And ever since then, they have had a head of their noble house be a matron who they passed down that title to. Well, the real problem is that in the first event, one of the first things that they find out is that the current Domina, the current head of the house who's inherited that title, is gone. And they were supposed to pass on the mantle to the new Domina in a few days. So they are willing to pay a handsome sum for the safe return of Lady Domina.
Okay.
And so from there, each warband was just able to just pick from scenarios. I had some already ready-made scenarios that were supposed to represent what a scout might typically do in the Frozen Expanse. And so the goal was to essentially just let them, play their games and just play the scenarios that they want to play, but then reward them with information or intel that might lead them to Domina.
Yeah, that's neat.
So that at the beginning of our event, it played a lot like a typical Inc. 28 event in a way, I guess, where you were just kind of playing games of Necromunda, right? And you had your scenario, but I was trying to give them a glimpse of what it would be like for their convoys typically. Like typically their convoys would just be, responding to a distress call, or they would just be searching for resources for somebody that they could sell or they could keep for themselves. Or they would run into another scout who they normally wouldn't fight, but everyone's starving and there's food in that cache and there's only enough for one convoy, right? So they duke it out. But they slowly got these cards and found out tidbits as they went along. And as they found out tidbits, it led into a couple scenarios that I had planned that were very narratively focused, and they only really had two outcomes to kind of help drive the story in a particular way. For example, they eventually found that there was two different Armiger Knight pilots that had been in contact with Domina at some point. And they traced them to a very particular location that's dangerous in Gelida because it's very, very windy with very loose snow. So it's really, so some people go there because the wind will pick up and sometimes reveal things buried deep under the snow that might be valuable, but you're lucky if you see it. You're lucky if you find it, because the rate at which the snow shifts and things are covered and hidden is very quick. So they found the night the Armiger pilots there, right? But there was one of them that was more important narratively than the others, and they kind of let him freeze to death. So they got a lore card about that character and how prestigious that character was and how they were going to break a very commonly known rule on Gelida, and that is that you don't bring back bodies. They broke that rule for him because on Gelida, if you put a body in your vehicle, that's room that a warm, live person could be taking up. So something that scouts just know is that when they venture out into the expanse, someday they're going to be a frozen corpse out there, and that's where they're going to stay. They're not going to get a burial. They're not going to get a tombstone. They're not going to get anything. And that's just the way it is. So what they could have found out if they had saved that night pilot, he would have told them that Demina had gone insane. That this lady Demina that they were after, that they were trying to bring back, she was not in her right mind. Because what she had done is she had taken this this three-eyed head that was frozen in ice that she had received as a gift from some mysterious patron.
What a cool gift.
What?
I said, what a cool gift.
I know. It's just lovely. It's perfect for any occasion. But she began obsessing over it and eventually had the crackpot idea that she should hook it up to navigational systems. And lo and behold, it worked. That's the crazy thing. So she went off embarking on this adventure, Don Quixote style.
Yeah.
Taking her squire with her. And what she did is she literally, like a crazy person, just walked right out the front gates of the city of Demina, and she just gave all the money she had to some family with some clunker of a vehicle, and took that because she didn't want anyone recognizing her.
Yeah.
Even though she had her personal squire flying the Demina colors and wearing his exosuit right behind her, she thought, this will be sneaky. So eventually they tracked her down. That happened on day 2 of the event, and I had a scenario planned that was kind of like what's the best way to put it? It's kind of like a dungeon crawl, but I was using a two 2x3 boards to do it. Any time that they moved off of one edge, I would take the other board and place it in a particular way, right, to represent the next section. And the reason that I did that is they were going into a place that is kind of like the Bermuda Triangle of Gelida. It's a place called the Argosy Triangle, and most people never make it out because it's just impossible to navigate when you're in there. And for a long time, people believed that there was a shrine to the machine god or something buried deep in there, because navigational systems start freaking out when you're in there. You know, your compasses are all off and your vox just don't work, and they start whispering to you, very creepy things. Well, they went really, really deep into there, and they eventually found Demina after fighting their way through hordes of beastmen. But when they found her there, they also found her kneeling to a particular godlike entity, which you may have seen before.
Yeah.
What I'll say to you guys is she had not met it before. It was not premeditated or planned, but she had gone far enough off the deep end, and she was so obsessed with her own significance and clinging to that with her life that she was willing to bow down to that sick thing.
Okay.
The big floating head thing.
Yes, and this is the smaller version of it that you see on the screen here. This is another creature aligned with that creature. But the interesting turn of events at the end of the first event was that some people did not make it out alive. Of course, they're lost in the Argosy Triangle and likely frozen to death. Shane's commander pilot was the only survivor of his group. Everything else died. And he eventually had to be encased in a dreadnought-like vehicle. He was put into one of these smaller vehicles, the smaller vehicles with like chicken legs. They're called voltigeurs. He eventually was encased in one of those because that's the only thing they could do with him after he got out of the Argosy Triangle. Because he was essentially, 2 inches, like 2 inches from the grave. But on the other hand, Rouge Falcon had a miniature in this event that was accompanied by a wolf who made it out unscathed. Seems curious. And, you know, in event number 2, they quickly found that he was willing to bow down to a certain creature for validation.
Yeah, okay. So like, is there any plan to like write up some of like kind of some of this stuff? And
Yes.
like, I know you mentioned about that you're gonna kind of release sort of a codex thing. Will that include some of these, like the scenarios that you created and some of like the cards and such?
Because I think
I
some
think-
of that could be like a huge inspiration to other people who are trying to like kind of do similar events to kind of see like what you yourself did. Because see, like I feel since I think like a lot of the event, most people really only knew about it from like Instagram and stuff. It's really hard to get. It's hard to know like how in depth like the narrative elements went or not, and like I feel most people looking into it maybe just assume that like there wasn't much going on back there, and like based on all the stuff you've told us just in this short period of time, like there's a huge like wealth of like ideas and knowledge and stuff that I think would really excite a lot of people if they knew more about it. And I think it probably would have driven more people like, heck yeah, I want to be a part of that. And I guess in many senses, since like there are going to be potentially future events, like at least another one in England, like I think hell, like I'd be excited to like try and do more stuff involved with the whole thing, because like it sounds really neat.
Yeah. So one, yes, I do plan to write about everything that happened in these events. Although the lore that did happen in these events, I think is maybe going to be less useful to the community as a whole. I hope that they enjoy it, and I hope they find it interesting. But for anybody who's inspired by Gelida or wants to do more with it, the events may not be that helpful because they're actually telling the saga of the fall of Gelida. This is the end of the book, so to speak. This is the end of the chapter. I don't know when in the 40K timeline it would take place, so to speak, but Gelida will either be gone or be a very, very different world by the end of the England event. On the other hand, I do intend to pack in the general lore of the world itself in the codex. I hope that it actually takes up more room than the rules by the time that I'm done. And I'm also trying to incorporate a map. Because
like even if you didn't,
untouched things in it. There's there's actually a lot of very important untouched things in it. Like the map has a location called the Grave of the Deus, and the Grave of the Deus has many statues poking up out of the ground, and the inhabitants just assume that they must be, statues of the emperor and his subjects. They have no idea that they may be some of the last remnants of Christianity in all of 40K. They're full-on statues of Christian angels and of Jesus and of, depictions of God just poking up out of the ice, because that was something that was on Gelida before whatever horrible thing that happened that made it an ice world. So I imagine that sometime during the Horus Heresy, when before the Horus Heresy, so Unification Wars or something like that, that when Gelida was discovered, that it was the Christian religion was a big part of the world itself, and that did not sit well. Obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, like, because I feel like even if like just some of like the cards or something you associated, with it.
Sorry, I meant to touch on that. I apologize. I was just trying to keep track of everything you had asked me.
Yeah, we asked you a lot,
and I forgot. I forgot about that. The cards. I had the help of a friend who designed them, and I want to make them into a sort of template that can just be edited. It's difficult right now. The way that they're put together, they're really high res, like Illustrator files in Photoshop, and the way that I make the cards now is kind of excruciating because I have to go into Photoshop and edit each individual card and then take a picture of the card and then transfer that to a different sheet so it's all organized, the proper size, and ready to print. And that's kind of a pain in the neck. So I want at some point to just take blank cards and make an editable PDF. But the thing is that the cards themselves are not going to look nearly as nice as the cards that were made for the event because they're using really nice typesets and they're all like formatted with a header and with a footer and with a body. And when I put out I want to put out an editable like sheet of just the cards, but it won't be that. It'll just be like type your stuff on the card.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think just for people to be able to see how you went about it, I think would be, a valuable resource. I guess this has been going pretty long, so I mean, we might want to wrap it up relatively soon, but I guess there are a few other general things that, like maybe two main things that I'd like to like get a little bit of your input on. Like, what were some of the inspirations for like the creepy floating demon thing and just the ice planet as a whole? Like, what were some of the things that led you to create this and like inspirations throughout the process?
So I'll address the shortest answer first. The reason it's an ice world is because no one had done it.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
That was it. Although it being an ice world led to inspiring a lot of other things. For example, the focus on vehicles. Which is another thing that I didn't think, I didn't think people had done it in that particular way before. There is definitely great Inc. 28 settings that precluded me that focused on vehicles. But they usually focused on vehicles, but still had like a full Necromunda crew. I wanted it to be the focus on a couple lone pilots and their trusty vehicles, if that makes sense. So that the vehicles were characters just as much as the pilots were. So the second thing, giant mutant floaty headfuck. That thing. So first inspiration, I have issues. That's the best explanation of where the head came from in the first place. But the second and the bigger reason, although there are a lot of aesthetic inspirations for that head, the Behelit from the Berserk series.
Eli mentioned that.
Obviously a clear one. Yes, Berserk is a big one. Lovecraft is a big inspiration. And
the Killing Cold.
Mountains of Madness was the book I was reading when I was designing him. But
cool. A great short novel,
but a brilliant one.
Yeah.
But more importantly, that thing was supposed to fill a philosophical role. and this is going to sound strange, because I don't know how often people worry about the philosophy of their Inc. 28 settings, but Gelida was intended to be an even darker version of a Nietzschean setting.
Okay.
For those who aren't familiar, Friedrich Nietzsche was a philosopher who precluded World War II, most famously known for the quote, "God is dead and we killed him."
Yeah. Yeah.
He was not a fan of Christianity and religion, but when he said God is dead and we killed him, he said that with a sense of pain and a sense of woe, because he also predicted that millions would die as a result, and that the void in people's lives left where religion used to reside was not going to be easily filled.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that he predicted that we as a world would struggle to fill that void, and likely would continue to fill it with artifacts of our previous cultures.
Yeah.
So Gelida is that very much in a way, but I decided to try to take the grimness of Nietzsche's predictions and take them one step further. What if you knew your God existed, but they just didn't care?
Yeah.
Gelida is a world that has largely been abandoned by the Imperium. Even when the Imperium still made voyage to it, it wasn't on most star charts. And now, in the 40K lore, it just simply isn't.
Yeah.
As far as the Imperium is concerned, it doesn't exist. And for those still loyal to the Imperium, they know that. In fact, I'll have to send it to you one of these times, to you guys, because I don't have it on hand. But I actually wrote a Gelidan prayer that specifically acknowledges that the Imperium likely will never show and has likely abandoned Gelida as a whole, but that people actually wear this as a purity seal, which, by the way, was something that everyone who attended the events got. I actually made physical purity
Yeah,
seals.
yeah. You had some pictures on your Instagram page, which is cool.
Yeah. So I had the same friend who helped me make the cards, helped me make that purity seal, and he actually translated what I had written into High Gothic.
That's
great.
neat.
So you won't necessarily be able to read it when you see the purity seal itself, but trust me, in English, it has a translation, and it's very sad, and it's very grim, because it essentially just talks about how anyone who's an imperial subject on Gelida knows that someday they're just going to die in the snow, knelt to their knees, frozen to death, hoping that the Imperium will come. And even though they won't, they acknowledge in the prayer itself that the Imperium's not coming to save them. To them, it's still worth it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, Gelida also has a contingency of those who praise the dark gods. They've been very few over the period of time, because it seems very, very clear that even the chaos gods don't care about what's going on Gelida. So all of their praises and all of their offerings have really yielded them nothing.
Yeah.
The gods don't care. They just simply don't care what's going on. But this miniature right here, the point was that no one is supposed to understand exactly what in the world it is.
Yeah.
I can tell you I have come up with 5 or 6 different explanations as to what it is, and I, at some point, will likely include all of them in a lore post.
That's cool.
And just simply tell people, you decide.
Yeah.
You decide.
I feel it's better to have that air of mystery around it.
Yeah.
Like, I think it allows people to more invest a little bit more of themselves into it. So yeah, that's really cool.
And
yeah. Well, at least
one of the things that I think works so well for the whole thing, like I feel like the people coming into the event, like the first event, for instance, all the different like scouts and stuff, so they're kind of venturing out into this frozen expanse. Like they don't really know a whole lot of what's going on or what they'll find, and kind of like the
Hmm.
players themselves don't either. And you're kind of
Right.
just going forth into that like white expanse and like
Yeah, that white
hopefully
death.
you'll find something. Hopefully it leads where you want to go, but you don't necessarily know. And like you're slowly piecing together things as they kind of come up. And like I think that
Hmm.
kind of works really well with the whole setting and kind of helps kind
Yeah,
of create
yeah.
its own narrative. And then particularly if you have other things to kind of spur that forward based on their actions and stuff like that's wonderful.
Yeah, really, really compelling.
I certainly hope so. Honestly, I hadn't thought about that. The primary reason that I made this miniature so mysterious is because in RPGs, what I had experienced is that it's almost impossible to actually make people terrified of a miniature.
Yeah, yeah,
You know what I
yeah.
mean? Like people joke, and they always have after seeing this miniature, like, "Oh, thanks for the nightmare fuel, man," or
Yeah.
like, "Okay, well, I'm never going to sleep again," and and things like that. But obviously, they're mostly jokes. It's a miniature, and everybody knows it
Hmm.
is, so it's not really going to instill any sort of terror. But what I found in playing the occasional game of Call of Cthulhu or running my
Hmm.
own horror centric RPGs is that what you can do is one, you can touch on people's sense of disgust. That's something that you can
Hmm.
always touch on, even in a miniature, even in a story, in a narrative.
Yeah.
Like even when you're four sweaty dudes sitting in a room rolling dice, you can always touch on people's sense of disgust by being very descriptive. And I hope, at least, I tried to make this a very high contrast descriptive miniature. You know, it
Yeah.
has a lot to say, even though it's not saying anything. And then the second thing is that it being mysterious, that in itself adds a line of terror.
Yeah.
Like because the unknown itself is terrifying to anybody. So at the event, you know, obviously the players could tell you for certain what they would actually think about it, but at least as far as I could tell, the players themselves, they they were genuinely to an extent afraid of what the hell this thing was going to do to them, you know, because they didn't know. They didn't know what it was. They didn't know what it did. You know, they didn't know why it was there, how it
Yeah.
showed up. It just kind of did, you
Well,
know.
H.P. Lovecraft has the quote: "The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown."
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's why he was
It.
racist.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
um,
He
but
was.
Yeah.
That's another
but
conversation.
yeah, I just thought I would get a zinger in there.
Yeah.
I love his books, but he's quite a character. So it's pertaining to Gelida, though. Um, this creature was very easily adopted by those who were looking for a god, because that's another thing that's a theme throughout. Not necessarily Friedrich Nietzsche's work himself, but Nietzschean works. When people have taken on that philosophy and tried to write a story inspired by it, more often than not, you run into characters who are simply willing to invent their own gods or just adopt the first thing that comes around or adopt the relics of the past, even though they may actually cogently know that those gods are likely not real.
Yeah.
And so this thing that we're looking at here became a beacon for those who needed it, being the oppressed and those already looking to join chaos, and those who just simply needed an excuse to revolt for an uprising, you know, and that thing showing up kind of led into event two. By that stature. But there's a lot of different things within the world itself that I had thought hard about the Nietzschean sort of theme I was trying to purport and tried to incorporate it as well. That's not the only thing. All of the noble houses have that aspect. I mentioned before that location on the map, the house, the grave of Deus, same thing. No one knows exactly what the hell those are. They don't understand that they're statues from old Christianity, but they are a representation of literal dead gods. Gods that are not worshipped and don't exist in the world anymore, but the remnants, the artifacts, are still there, and they still influence the world around them, whether people know it or not.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, and like I feel it'll be cool, like if you can write up some of that stuff, even just a little bit. Like certainly it doesn't have to be super in depth, but just enough to get people to wonder and think about it. I think would be really
even
neat.
like because them coming up with like their own explanations and ideas of what's happening in itself is almost like perfect, because everyone there on this planet, like, they really have no idea what's going on, and they themselves are piecing together everything that they've seen and trying to kind of comprehend with all these like horrors, like the horrors of the unknown, the horrors of these creatures and stuff they run into, the horrors of just like surviving the next day, etc. It kind of all works itself up into something cool.
Yeah. I completely agree, and I hope that when these materials are public, that players will continue to play games in Gelida. There's a lot of amazing miniatures and a lot of amazing people who made those miniatures who weren't able to make it to events, but I certainly hope will still organize their own games and organize their own narratives, maybe based on things that happened before the fall of Gelida. But I know that it's very likely that they will come to their own conclusions, and so to try to make sure that the world itself is a little bit more cogent, I do intend to include some of the attitudes that each house has adopted and each city has adopted and the citizens have adopted as a result of this lack of a god who cares, so to speak, or, lack of the presence of a god. For example, some kind of an overarching theme in House Murris, which we haven't discussed, which is a house that has a city that's been lined with a 30-foot wall for years. For centuries, people have not been in and out of, or very rarely have been in and out of that city. And their citizenry have actually been led to believe the Imperium never existed. They think it's a myth, that it's a joke, or that it was their government state, so to speak. The noble house have convinced the citizenry that it was all propaganda.
Yeah.
It was all a ploy to just get them looking to the stars rather than looking to the ground. And it's kind of a way to keep them motivated, and to keep their focus on just helping House Murris as much as they can. But part of that is because Murris doesn't trade very much, as it's kind of hard to do with a 30-foot wall.
It's kind of and especially
people. Yeah, kind of. Oh, hey, I think what you did there. So they have to produce almost everything for themselves. And that doesn't go over well. There's a lot of things they can't produce themselves. It becomes very difficult for them, and tensions are usually high with Murris and the other houses, because especially with Domina and Murris don't get along very well, because Domina is the very opposite, politically speaking. They let anyone in their city. They have completely open borders. They'll welcome anyone open arms, just like, have at them. You're part of us now. But even though they are the richest of the houses, they have the most economic disparity. The resources are spread very, very thin because there's a huge overpopulation issue. But I digress.
Yeah, no, I mean that all sounds good. I guess maybe just as like a very last thing,
Uh-huh.
all of this sounds like it was great. Like both of the events that have transpired this far sound great. Like there have been lots of awesome photos and all that sort of stuff. But like, is there anything that didn't work out that well, or that didn't happen as you anticipated that you might want to, like, if you were going to do something like this again, would want to change, like logistically, rule wise, just as sort of a thing for anyone who might be trying to do this themselves? Like, what are things you would want to watch out or recommend people to like have and keep in mind?
Oh, so many things. I mean, a gigantic list of things.
Well, maybe
And
just like
I'll
one or
I'll
two
break
of
it
like the
down
major
to yeah.
things.
Yeah, I'll break it down to just what other people can take away from it. Because, for example, there's things that I had to change about the rules from event 1 to event 2, but I won't go into that because that's always going to depend on your setting, and it's not necessarily going to be terribly helpful to like Gelida's specific rules I made up had to be changed. Everyone's going to use their own rules, or maybe even use Gelida's rules for their own settings, and they're going to have to make their adjustments based on their vision and their scope. So
Yeah.
On the other hand, some more cogent advice that I think anybody can take. I would suggest for anybody who wants to take on an Inc. 28 setting, start small. This was way too much of an undertaking for my first Inc. 28 setting. And a lot of things went well, but I think that in a lot of ways, I was saved by the very, very nick of time in a lot of ways by other people contributing and helping me out with things. A lot of things would not have gone to plan had I not had a troop of 100 people to beg on my hands and knees to help me fix certain things in time for an event and this, that, and this. And it is an absolute, it is absolutely devastating to, at least for me, being a more sensitive person, to ever have to tell someone no when they're already investing time and energy and artistic merit and money and miniatures, into a setting. And no, not everyone is going to read the background material first, and not everybody is going to seek you out before they make something for your setting. And so if you open the floodgates in a way, like I did with Gelida, where essentially anybody who could find the Gelida group and answer a few questions, I let them in. Then it may be a lot to juggle for your first setting, and you may want to try to scale it back and then share the results. If this is the first time that you're embarking on something like this, my advice is you should try to do it the way that it's been done first before you try to break the wheel. It works really, really well to get with a couple of friends who you trust. Like, you got to be able to trust that their artistic skill is going to match your ambition. You're going to have a picture in your mind of what you want your setting to look like, and you need to make sure that those involved, their artistic skills match that to an extent. Because there are some incredible painters that I know, absolutely incredible painters that I would never want as a part of Gelida, who just have completely different painting styles, or they have a different scope or different idea of it. And the same thing goes for narrative. Your narrative is very, very important to the world itself. And in Inc. 28, narrative is very collaborative. It's not like writing a novel. It's more like a book group in a way. You're all going to be writing and creating it together. It's like having a bunch of producers on a song. everybody's idea is going to have a little bit of weight and merit. And so you need to make sure that you trust the people that you're working with, so that when they throw an idea at you, that you're open to it, because you're not going to be very open to it if it's a person who you think writes terrible stories.
Yeah, no, that's certainly true.
So I think that caused some issue. The second thing is that I don't think that running multiple events is a good idea your first time around. My event here, I only had 2 people actually come from out of town, so to speak. And because I probably didn't need to do it, but I felt as if the event itself needed a few more bodies. So I had some friends of mine locally who joined, and I could tell at some points that although they were enjoying themselves, that they didn't really understand like what Inquisitor gaming is like. They were coming from a 40K sort of background.
Yeah.
And one of them, since then, he went out and he bought the Inquisitor book, like an actual copy from eBay, and he's been sending me lore write-ups from his convoy from the event and how they died. And
That's great.
And he's been just like digging into it really good. So I'm really glad that happened. But there was other times where I felt like with one person who was there playing with us, I almost felt like we were at odds for a moment, which was tough because he's one of my closest friends. But I think that the setting and the ideas and especially just how dark and survivalist, Gelida was, and just how it's the exact opposite of a power fantasy. That I think that because he was just kind of like filling in, at some points I felt like we were at odds, and I didn't like that. It kind of made me sick for a moment, because that was the first Gelida event, and I just wanted so desperately for everything to go great.
Yeah, I mean, I feel for all these events, like you're never going to be able to predict everything or plan for everything, but like just the ability to get together with friends, make new friends, and just the whole journey along the process, creating models, getting feedback, like that's a large portion of these events. And like, so
yeah, I feel in some regard the whole process of people building and sharing what they're working on, that in itself is just as important to the event as like the actual meetup and playing the different games and stuff.
I personally think it's more important.
Yeah, I mean, because that people bouncing ideas off one another and kind of getting excited and exciting other people about it is kind of really half the fun of it.
Yeah.
And I also think that if anything, the art that we create is what's most inspiring.
That's true.
I've read a lot about these events of the past, but I'm telling you that there's nothing I have read about Tor Megiddo that is more inspirational than just seeing the Scrap Queen. And there's nothing I've read about Legend that was as inspiring as just seeing all of those giants crush over the hillside.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's something visceral about the miniatures and the art and the creations that come out of this community that speak volumes and are so immense, and are so much more important than any game that we have. The games themselves, I cherish them, I really do. But if for the rest of my life I could never attend a single Ink 28 event, but I could make a miniature for every single one of them, I would still be pretty happy. But if I wasn't making any miniatures or making any art for any of these Ink 28 events, but people were still having me come, I wouldn't come. Like I wouldn't be a part of it. If I couldn't be a part of creating the art, or if I couldn't be inspired by others' art, then I would be done. I wouldn't be a part of it anymore, because at least for me, that's the part that's most important to me.
Yeah.
And I think it's the primary difference between someone who really enjoys like competitive 40K, for example, and people like us.
Yeah.
Because art and atmosphere to us trump gameplay and strategy and things like that.
Yeah.
Because if those things were the most important to me, I'd play StarCraft. It's a lot cheaper.
Yeah.
It looks very, very pretty.
Balanced.
There's people who put some immense work into that. There's patches all the time that you don't have to download in a FAQ.
Nah, that's very true. That's very true. All right. Well, I mean, I feel this has been a great session. It's been awesome to talking with you about various things about Gelida and just kind of your thoughts about Inc. 28 as a whole. It went on maybe a little longer than I had initially thought, but I think the conversation was really great, and I hope the listeners, in the actual the stream itself, and anyone listening to this in the podcast form of it, have enjoyed it. And so it's been really nice. Do you have any last things you'd like to say, Cody, before we maybe draw this to a close?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I owe a great debt to the three of you, not just for inviting me to this podcast, but just for being what friends and beacons that you've been for me for this event. For those of you who don't know, there's a lot of things that these three gentlemen have done to help me behind the scenes in numerous ways. They deserve every accolade that they get. The second thing is that there is a lot more to Gelida than just my musings on the world and the narrative. And like I said before, the most important part, at least to me, is the art and the contributions that people have made in that fashion. So if you get a chance, swing by Instagram, and you should follow hashtag Gelida40K. That's the hashtag that we decided to land upon, because Gelida is also a city in a couple countries. So you'll get a lot of touristy photos if you're looking that up. So if you could the one favor you could do for me is go to hashtag Gelida40K and follow some of the artists there. You don't even need to follow me. Just show some support, because there's a lot of people who have done me and the community an honor by participating and making some extremely beautiful art.
No, yeah, that is certainly true. There's so many cool models, and just by following people and commenting on their stuff, I think is a good way to kind of help the community and just get people generally excited about the hobby as a whole, and encourage them to try their hand at doing this and taking their own unique inspirations to create models and such. And I think everyone's unique perspective, how they got into the hobby and got to this point in their lives, I think is valuable for creating unique and cool models that can actually explore something of the human condition. I think that's neat. And in Gelida here, actually explore elements of horror and sci-fi and fantasy and all that stuff, I think is just really cool.
I hope so too. The last thing that I will say is that I do intend to make the materials of Gelida available to the public, but I don't know exactly how I'm going to disseminate it yet. It may be on another artist's blog, because I don't have a website and I haven't decided whether that's something I want to invest in. Mm-hmm. But one thing's for certain, if you are interested, if you want to delve into the lore of Gelida, or if you want to explore using the rules for an event in the future, or if you want to play your own games of Gelida, which I would highly encourage and I'd love to hear about, you can follow me at Magos Buer on Instagram. It's MOGS_BUER. And I will announce there wherever I'm going to be posting Gelida's rules. They will be accompanied with the lore and with any other materials that you may need. You can always send me a message as well if you have any questions, or if you just want a friend of the community. There's always camaraderie to be had.
Yeah, no, well said. Well said.
Also, I can say if you do want to, we'd certainly be more than willing to post some of like your like lore and story elements and stuff on our blog itself if you want a potential venue to show some of that. Like, so that's an offer if you're interested. Because
of course I'm interested.
In general, like the more of this stuff we can get out there to inspire people, the better.
Yeah.
Well, I hope it's inspiring, but I agree. The more lore from the events and the more materials from the events that can be shared, I think the more likely that we may see yet another breakout setting come about. But I definitely will take you up on that. I think that I will likely write a lore type post about the first event rather than a battle report. I think I'll write it more.
Yeah, certainly.
Like a narrative type write up, and I'll likely disseminate that with a couple different places if I can.
Yeah, it seems okay, good.
I know that Anna said that she would be happy to host Gelida related things as well, and obviously, we all love Gardens of Hecate.
Yeah, it's true.
Her blog is incredible. And her miniature serves as the poster child for Gelida. Unofficially or officially, I guess it's officially. God damn it! I made the setting. So, I've used her miniature as the poster child for the setting anyway. So I think that it would be fitting.
No, I certainly agree.
Add some of the stuff there, but I want to post it everywhere that I'm able. Even if it's just on her blog and on your blog, I think that would be a great start, and then maybe Gelida might spread a little bit more from there.
Yeah, no, that's a very good thought.
But anyways, I think that at least personally, I'm definitely going to have to wrap this up.
Yeah,
but I know that's the way we're doing this. So thank you, all of you, Adam, Eric, Greg. You're incredible. I appreciate deeply that you had me on, and even though I could probably go for 3 more hours about this stuff,
we
did a good job of covering a lot of
off somewhere, right?
Yeah, thanks again for coming and chatting with us. Like, I've certainly learned a lot, and I know all the listeners who've been here and will listen to it in the future, I think we'll be able to find some interesting things to at least ponder on and inspire future work.
Yeah, and again, thanks for joining us, and I'm sure we can have you on again sometime to talk about the next thing or just whatever.
Yeah, certainly.
Of course.
So
I'm always happy to be dragged into some lasers.
Excellent. All right. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we will talk to you again soon.
Over and out.
All right. We did it.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
I feel it's going to be a good episode. Thanks everyone in the chat for their questions and comments. I don't think we necessarily did a great job of answering all of them, but we tried to touch on some of them. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. And for anyone whose questions were missed just feel free to send me a message. I'd be happy to answer at least anything pertaining to Gelida. And I'm sure the boys here between the Bolter and me would be happy to answer any questions directed to them.
Yeah, no, certainly. As always, feel free to contact us, however, via Instagram, email, whatever. Like, we're always happy to talk and try to help in any way we can.
Mm-hmm. Well, all right. I think we're gonna end this stream. Certainly tune in next week if you can. We'll have another. We'll talk about something. I don't know what it's gonna be yet, but
Yeah.
And I
Probably
guess
gonna be
people have
those when they
ideas
come
for
in.
that too. That's fine as well. All right. Well, yeah. Keep on enjoying the hobby, everyone. We'll talk to you again soon.